I went to the airport with my daughter-in-law, Emily, and my grandson, Michael, to welcome my son. He was coming back after a year of working abroad. Suddenly, a security guard walked up to me and asked, "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you?" I was surprised. "Do you mean my daughter-in-law? She just went to the bathroom." Through the guard's radio, I heard a cold voice say, "She just ran toward Gate G. Proceed to surround her." I stood there paralyzed, not understanding what was happening. I quickly pulled out my phone to call her, but she did not answer. The phone was already turned off. 15 minutes later, the international arrivals area was chaotic. But before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching this video from. We would love to know how far our stories of revenge travel. The noise of the airport surrounded me, but in my mind, only one sound echoed: the announcement that the flight from London had landed. I had been there with my daughter-in-law Emily and my grandson Michael for almost an hour, sitting patiently under the huge electronic board, and then the line I had waited for appeared glowing in a hopeful green. Landed. It had been exactly 1 year since I said goodbye to Daniel, my son, when he went to work abroad right here in this same airport. I felt a joy that is hard to describe, a mix of excitement and nervousness. I squeezed Michael's small hand tightly. The boy also looked at me with those big eyes full of enthusiasm. "Grandma." "I'm going to the bathroom for a moment," Emily said suddenly with a tone more hurried than usual. "I feel a little sick." I nodded my head, my attention already focused on the international arrivals gate where my son would come out shortly. I smiled to myself completely, forgetting that Emily had walked away. About 5 minutes passed, and a man in a security uniform approached. He looked different from the usual patrol employees. His uniform was more formal, and above all, his gaze was sharp as if he were on an important mission. He did not look directly at me. His eyes inspected the place, and then he lowered his voice to ask an unexpected and strange question. "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you?" I was surprised, and by reflex, I pointed toward the bathroom area. "Do you mean my daughter-in-law?" "She just went to the restroom." As soon as I finished speaking, a static sound came out of the radio on his shoulder. Then another voice was heard, cold and clear, cutting through the airport noise. "She just ran toward Gate G. Proceed to close off the area." The officer jumped. His expression changed completely from inquisitive to extremely tense. He nodded and then looked at me with a mix of suspicion and scrutiny. A chill ran down my spine. What is going on? With trembling hands, I took out my cell phone and quickly dialed Emily's number. The tone rang only once before going straight to voicemail, as if someone had turned off the phone instantly. My heart started beating wildly. At the same time, from different points of the place, dozens of men moved quickly with weapons in hand and police badges on their chests, spreading out through the waiting room. The passengers started to notice something strange. Murmurs were heard, some backed away in fear, others raised their phones to record. I hugged Michael tightly. The boy started to get scared and hid his face in my chest. And then, in the middle of all that chaos, my son appeared. Daniel came out through the arrivals door. He looked thinner and tanned, but his smile was just as I remembered in my thoughts. He was pushing a luggage cart full of suitcases, and in the other hand, he held a small, carefully wrapped gift bag. His eyes searched with excitement through the crowd. When his eyes met mine, his smile widened even more dazzling. He raised his hand to wave and started walking quickly toward us, leaving the cart behind. "Mom! Michael!" When he was only 15 feet away from us, 2 people lunged at him from the sides. "Are you Daniel Miller?" A cold voice was heard. Daniel stood paralyzed, the smile frozen on his lips. He nodded still with a face of bewilderment. "Yes, that is me. What is happening?" The sound of handcuffs echoed dry and cruel, closing firmly on his wrists. The gift bag fell to the ground, and its contents scattered everywhere. Everyone around me went silent. "What are you doing?" I screamed with my mind in tatters. I grabbed Michael, who was already crying loudly, and ran toward my son. "Let my son go! You are taking the wrong man." Daniel was completely out of it. He tried to break free in vain, his face twisted with fear. Why? What did I do wrong? A burly police officer stopped me. His arm was like an iron clamp. His voice was monotone without emotion like that of a machine. Mrs. Miller, calm down. He has been arrested for being linked to an international scam network. Please come with us to the station to give a statement. My ears were ringing. The world that minutes before was overflowing with joy for the reunion was now crumbling completely. I could only watch as they took my son away with his hands handcuffed behind his back amidst camera flashes and the curious looks of the entire airport. The police did not take me immediately to an interrogation room. They led me and Michael to a small waiting room, sterile, perhaps reserved for special cases. Michael kept sobbing in my arms. His tiny body shook without stopping. I had to be strong for him. With a trembling hand, I dialed the number of Linda, my closest cousin in the city. My voice was breaking. It did not sound like mine anymore. Linda, come to the airport right now. Come in through the international terminal. Ask for the security room. Take Michael. Daniel is... I could not finish the sentence. My throat closed up. The police took him into custody. I have to go now. Linda arrived like a gust of wind, pale as a sheet. She did not ask much, she just nodded in silence and extended her arms toward Michael. I felt like my heart was being ripped out when I had to separate my grandson's little fingers one by one from my clothes. Grandma, he sobbed, where is Daddy? And Mommy? He held on to me tight, not wanting to let go. Finally, Linda had to carry him in her arms. His crying echoed down the entire hallway, a heartbreaking chorus. Grandma, Daddy, Mommy. Until their silhouettes disappeared behind the automatic door, only I remained alone in a terrifying silence. The ride to the police station was in complete silence. The car moved along the highway, but I saw nothing through the window. They took me down a long, cold hallway with fluorescent lights that fell pale on the shiny tile floor. The smell of disinfectant and old papers hit my nose. I sat on a hard plastic chair right in front of the gray steel door of the interrogation room. The door remained closed quiet as a grave locking my son and the truth inside. A young officer brought me a cup of water. Her eyes showed compassion. I nodded my head in thanks. My cold hand grabbed the plastic cup, but I could not drink. My throat was dry, yes, but it was not thirst for water. It was thirst for the truth. To not go crazy while I waited to prevent the worst images from invading my mind, I forced myself to think, to reconstruct everything from the beginning. I am Sarah Miller, a retired literature teacher. My husband died 10 years ago. Since then, my world shrank to Daniel and my grandson, Michael. Daniel is a noble man, a talented carpenter, but too trusting. And Emily, my daughter-in-law. I clearly remember the day when Daniel Radiant told us he had an opportunity to work at a big furniture company in England. Emily supported him immediately. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her eyes shining with pride. It is the best opportunity for him, Mom. Do not worry, I will take care of you and Michael. And for more than a year, she kept her promise. Emily was an exemplary daughter-in-law. She took care of me with dedication. She took care of Michael at every meal, in every sleep. Her craft business was doing better and better. She was the pride of the whole family. But now, sitting in this cold chair, those little memories that I previously considered insignificant returned to my mind, sharp and terrifying. In those sleepless nights typical of old age, I used to hear the soft sliding of the glass balcony door. Emily would go out there talking on the phone with someone. Her voice was so low it was almost inaudible. Once a gust of night wind slightly opened my bedroom door. I managed to hear a few loose words that did not sound at all like craft topics. Package, clean. At that moment, I dismissed it, thinking they were work terms I did not understand. And then new objects started to appear. A designer bag that I knew cost the same as my pension for a month. Expensive sunglasses, a latest generation phone. Every time I asked, Emily smiled with that radiant smile that erased all doubt. It is a bonus the company gave me for finishing a special project, Mom. She even gave me a soft and luxurious silk scarf. You deserve it, she told me. That smile, those words, now that I remember them, give me chills. And then the clearest memory, the most painful one, came back, like a giant wave. It was an autumn afternoon about 3 months ago. I was watering my geranium pots in the hallway right next to Emily's office. The door was ajar. Her voice could be heard with total clarity through the phone. A cold and calculating voice I had never heard from her before. No, we cannot use my account. It is too risky. Use Daniel's. He is in England. He will not find out. That way the money will look cleaner. Clean. That word stuck in me like a dagger. A shiver ran down my spine. My hand trembled and I almost dropped the watering can. I was about to knock on the door enter and demand an explanation, but the cowardice of always stopped me. I told myself surely it is something about work taxes or something like that. I am old, I do not understand these things. I should not be suspicious without reason. I did not want her to get upset and break the family harmony. I walked away in silence, pretending I had heard nothing. I sat up suddenly in the plastic chair. The ticking of the clock in the hallway sounded constant, relentless. The door to the interrogation room remained closed. Remorse and unbearable fear squeezed my chest until they took my breath away. It is not that I did not know. The truth is, I chose not to know. I covered my eyes and ears myself before all the strange signs just to maintain that false appearance of a happy family. And now my son is paying the price for my cowardice. Almost 3 hours passed. I was still sitting on that hard plastic chair with my body already numb. Then a dry click broke the silence. The gray door of the interrogation room opened, but the one who came out was not my son. It was a man of about 50 years old, dressed in an elegant suit, his graying hair perfectly combed. He had a broad forehead and a sharp gaze with the authority of someone accustomed to handling terrible secrets. He looked nothing like the uniformed police officers I had seen before. "Mrs. Miller?" His voice was deep and calm. I nodded mechanically. "I am Chief Inspector Miller, the lead on this case." He said nothing else in the hallway. He just signaled for me to follow him to a small office nearby. The room was tidy, with a window looking out onto a gray interior courtyard. On the dark wooden desk rested a thick file. On the cover there was a white label with 2 typewritten words, Daniel Miller. My heart sank. Inspector Miller did not beat around the bush or ask meaningless, polite questions. He sat down, opened a file, and turned it toward me. The first page was a diagram full of lines, boxes, and numbers like a giant spider web. "Mrs. Miller." He began, pointing with his finger at a box in the center of that web where my son's name was. "In the last 14 months, the bank account in the name of your son, Daniel Miller, has received a total of more than $2 million from 47 different accounts all over Europe." $2 million. That number was like lightning splitting me in two. I shook my head with my mouth open, but unable to pronounce a word. He turned to the next page, where there was a list of transactions. That money, he continued with a tone flat like a newscaster, was transferred almost immediately to accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands. "It is a classic money laundering process, ma'am. Very professional. It cannot be." Finally, I managed to say something. I stood up, suddenly leaning both hands on the table so as not to fall. My voice trembled, full of indignation. "My son is a carpenter. He only knows how to use his hands to sand wood drive nails, not to handle numbers. He does not even know how to use those complicated banking apps. How could he launder money? You are wrong. There has to be a mistake." Inspector Miller looked at me with a glint of compassion in his eyes, but his voice remained firm as steel. "We are very sorry, ma'am, but all the material evidence points in one single direction." He turned to another sheet where there was a scan of a business account opening contract. "This signature," he pointed to the line at the end, "is your son's, right?" It was Daniel's signature, the letters slanting to the right, unmistakable. All account opening documents, all authorizations for international transfers bear the signature of Daniel Miller. I let myself fall back into the chair without strength, as if something had emptied me from the inside. I looked at him, almost begging. Please let me see him just 5 minutes. I need to hear it from his mouth. Inspector Miller hesitated for a moment. He looked at my desperate eyes. Then he sighed and nodded. They took me to another area of the building, crossing hallways with cold bars. The sound of the footsteps of the police officer accompanying me echoed on the concrete floor. Daniel was sitting in a small, empty room. There was only a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs. There were no windows. He was not handcuffed, but an officer guarded the door from the outside, his huge body blocking almost the entire glass window. When I entered, Daniel looked up. His face was pale without a drop of blood, his eyes red and swollen. The clothes he had worn at the airport that he had chosen with such excitement to see the family again were now wrinkled and disheveled. I sat in front of him, trembling, and took his cold hands. "Daniel," I whispered. "What happened? Tell me the truth." Daniel looked at me, his eyes full of tears. His voice trembled, full of shame. "Emily. It was Emily, Mom." He started to recount. She said she needed to open a business account to import craft materials from Asia for her new business. I did not understand any of that. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. A day before I flew to England, she met me at a coffee shop. She handed me a pile of papers and rushed me. "Sign fast, the lawyer is waiting. It has to be ready today so the merchandise arrives on time." I glanced at the documents, saw the company name, saw the conditions, but it was all legal language. I did not understand anything. I trusted her mom. I just thought I was helping her fulfill her dream. He rested his head on the metal table, his shoulders shaking. I signed without reading a single word. "Well, Mom." Where she pointed, I signed. I signed it all. A cruel and painful truth was revealed clear as day. My son, out of love and blind trust, became the scapegoat in the hands of his own wife. Just at that moment, the door to the room opened suddenly. Inspector Miller entered, his face expressionless. "Time is up, ma'am." He glanced at Daniel, who was slumped over, and then looked at me. His eyes now had a colder shine. "We just received an update. The woman who was with you at the airport, Emily Miller, has been confirmed as the main operator of this network in the Spanish branch. She already planned her escape before detecting our presence." He paused as if he wanted every word to stick in my mind, and dropped the final sentence, the one that destroyed any hope, however minimal. "All transactions, all illicit money, pass through accounts in your son's name. With the intellectual author on the run, legally, Daniel Miller will be prosecuted for money laundering and for being an accomplice in an international scam network." A scapegoat. My son was the perfect scapegoat. An officer entered from outside and gently helped Daniel stand up. My son did not resist. He walked like a shadow without a soul, stumbling. Upon reaching the door, he turned and looked at me one last time. In his eyes there was no anger, only absolute despair. I left the police station when the sky was already beginning to darken. The world continued its course, cars were still rushing. People walked as always. But my world had been shattered to pieces. The first thing I did the next morning was look for a lawyer. It was my only hope at that moment. I went to the office of Mr. Roberts, a middle-aged lawyer known for his good heart, recommended by an old friend. He received me in a cozy office with wooden shelves reaching the ceiling. He listened to my story with patience, even nodding occasionally with a sympathetic expression. But when I handed him the summary of charges that Inspector Miller had allowed me to photocopy, his kind smile faded. He read it over and over, frowned, and leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands. "Mrs. Miller," he said with courtesy but with distance, "I am very sorry for what your family is going through, but this case is too complicated, and the evidence is too overwhelming. Your son's signature is everywhere defending him will be practically impossible." He declined to take the case with kindness, claiming he already had too many pending cases. I left his office feeling like a bucket of cold water had been thrown on me, but I did not give up. I visited a second firm, then a third. The answers were similar. They looked at me with compassion and shook their heads, seeing the thick file. A young lawyer, perhaps due to lack of experience, was brutally honest with me. "Mrs. Miller, your son is the perfect scapegoat. No jury is going to believe that an adult man signed so many documents without reading them. Accepting this case would only make you lose money and affect my history of victories." At the end of the day, I returned home in a state of total hopelessness. The heavy iron door opened, and the only thing that greeted me was a terrifying silence. The house that Emily and I had built together now felt strange and cold. On the coffee table in the living room, the cardboard sign that Michael had been making with such effort the afternoon before was still there. The scribbled phrase, "Welcome home, Daddy," was painted in bright colors, like a bitter mockery of the tragedy that had just occurred. I let myself fall on the sofa, staring at the list of law firms in the notebook, all already crossed out with furious strokes of ink. Hope had gone out. Just at that moment, the doorbell rang. I did not want to see anyone. But the bell kept ringing, insistent, determined. Reluctantly, I dragged myself to the door. In front of it was a woman of about 40. She dressed simply jeans and a shirt, her dark hair gathered in a neat bun. But what caught my attention most were her eyes. Sharp, intelligent eyes that conveyed unusual determination. "Mrs. Sarah Miller?" she asked with a firm and clear voice. I nodded, still wondering who she was. "I am Detective Sarah Bennett," she introduced herself, showing a police badge. "I belong to the cybercrimes team, and I have been tracking Emily Miller for a long time." Hearing the name Emily Miller come out of a stranger's mouth startled me. I stepped back and invited her in. We sat in the living room right next to that welcome sign that now seemed like a curse. Bennett was not direct like Inspector Miller. She asked about Daniel. What did he like to eat? What was his personality like? How was his carpentry work going? Those questions did not sound like an interrogation, but rather a genuine attempt to know the real Daniel. After a while, seeing that I felt calmer, she told me. "Mrs. Miller, I read the case file. My experience tells me that the leaders of these organizations never dirty their hands. They always choose someone with a clean record, someone trusting, and most importantly, with little financial knowledge to use as a front." She paused and looked me straight in the eyes. "Your son fits that description perfectly." She held my gaze, wanting to convey trust. "I believe Daniel is innocent, but the belief of a cop like me is worth nothing in court. We need proof, concrete proof." For the first time in 2 days, a small and fragile spark of hope shone in my darkness. But what can we do? Emily fled. She erased all tracks. She left in too much of a hurry, Bennett said firmly, without a shred of doubt. People like Emily are arrogant. They think they are smarter than everyone, that they erased everything, but they usually leave small mistakes where they feel safest. Right here, in this house. She stood up, glancing around the living room with the analytical eyes of an investigator examining the scene. "I cannot ask for an official search warrant because we do not have enough legal grounds. All superficial evidence is against your son. But," she turned to me, "with your permission, we can investigate on our own. Cooperate with me, ma'am, for justice for Daniel. Justice for Daniel." Those words ran through my exhausted body like an electric current. I nodded without hesitation. My voice regained its strength. "What do you want me to do?" Detective Bennett's gaze landed on the hallway leading to the bedrooms and the study at the back of the house. During the time she lived here, was there any place Emily considered her territory? A space where not even you used to enter? I did not have to think for a second. Her study? I answered immediately. She always kept the door locked. She said she needed absolute silence to create. Bennett nodded with an almost imperceptible smile on her lips. "Then we will start there." I led Detective Bennett down the hallway. The oak door of the office stood imposing at the end of the corridor. By habit, I reached out to turn the brass knob. It was completely locked. It did not move a bit. "It is always like this," I whispered. Bennett did not flinch. She left her bag on the floor. She took out a small leather case with very professional movements. Upon opening it, several fine and shiny metal tools appeared. She looked at me sideways, noticed the surprise in my eyes, and smiled discreetly. It is an extra skill every investigator should have. Sometimes justice is behind a locked door. She knelt and began to work quickly and silently. Only the soft click of metal inside the lock was heard. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Less than a minute later, a small click was heard, a weak but absolutely definitive sound. The door opened slightly. Bennett pushed it and entered, and I followed her. A breath of cold air smelling of new paper and expensive air freshener greeted us immediately. The room appeared before my eyes as proof of Emily's obsessive meticulousness. Everything was ordered to the point of seeming sterile. The walnut desk shone without a speck of dust, the laptop closed with precision, the books aligned according to the color of the spine, from white to black, like a rainbow drained of life. That clinical order contrasted brutally with the chaos shattered of my life at that moment, and it gave me chills. Bennett put on some rubber gloves and passed me a pair. "Mrs. Miller, you live here, you know better than I how Emily organized everything. Look for anything that looks out of place, any object that does not fit." We began the search in silence. I went to the shelf, checking the books one by one, hoping to find something tucked inside a sheet, a memory card. But there was nothing, just art, design, and business books. Bennett, on the other hand, focused on the desk, the heart of the room. She opened every drawer methodically. The first was full of luxury office supplies, fountain pens, plated in gold notepads with Emily's company logo. The second contained contracts, legal business documents, the perfect facade of a successful businesswoman. I approached the white-painted steel filing cabinet in the corner. I pulled the top drawer. There were no papers inside, but several photo albums covered in leather. Out of curiosity, I opened one. I felt a cold pang in my heart. They were photos of Daniel and Emily's wedding, my son's radiant smile next to the woman who had put him in prison. On the next page, an image of Michael newborn, tiny and red in his mother's arms. Emily had carefully kept those memories as if she were really part of this family. Or perhaps it was just another fragment of her perfect facade. "Come see this." Bennett's voice pulled me out of my reverie. She was checking the bottom drawer of the desk. It was almost empty. It only had a few paper clips, but she was not looking at the contents. Instead, she was gently tapping the bottom of the drawer with her fingers. The sound was deeper and denser than in the other parts. Something was not right. She took out a tool thin like a cutter. She slid it skillfully along the edge of the pressed wood bottom. She lifted it carefully. The lid popped, revealing a secret compartment underneath. And here in the middle of that dark space was a small black velvet bag. Bennett lifted it carefully, placed it on the table, and gently tipped out its contents. I felt my heart stop. Each object that came out under the light seemed like a piece of a nightmare. 5 cheap mobile phones, the basic kind that only serve to call without internet access, the type of phones criminals usually use and discard. Dozens of SIM cards carefully wrapped in small zip bags. On each bag, Emily's neat handwriting had written a country name: Germany, France, England, Italy, and 2 identical black leather notebooks. My gloved hand trembled as I took one. I opened the first page. Inside were lines handwritten by Emily with delicate and perfectly ordered calligraphy. A long list of names: Elsa Schmidt, 81 years old, Germany; Jean-Pierre Logan, 79 years old, France; Maria Rossi, 85 years old, Italy. Next to each name, a long series of numbers. Bennett looked over my shoulder. Her voice hardened with rage. "Here it is, the list of victims. Most are over 70, elderly people alone. Those numbers must be bank accounts or the amount of money stolen from them." Just at that moment, when Bennett picked up the second notebook to check it, a thick envelope that was between the pages fell to the floor. I bent down to pick it up. It was not sealed. I took out the stack of photos inside. They were not family photos. They were images of Emily in elegant clothes sitting in meeting rooms of five-star hotels next to foreign men of very suspicious appearance. She was toasting, shaking hands, smiling with them. I flipped to a photo and froze. In it, Emily was next to a tall man in a black suit with a long, ugly scar on his right cheek. That face, that scar, I remembered it well. I had seen him on the news a few months ago. He was an international scammer wanted intensely by Europol. Bennett took the photo from my trembling hand. She observed the face of the man with the scar carefully. Then she looked at the other photos. Her eyes shone with a cold and cutting spark. "This not only proves she is involved," she said in a grave tone. "This proves that Emily Miller is not just any scammer. She is a key piece, someone with power inside this organization." Detective Bennett carefully put everything we found into a special sealed police bag. "I have to take this to the lab immediately," she said with an urgent but controlled voice. "My team will analyze the data from the phones and SIMs. It will take a little time, but we will find something for sure. Stay here and act normally. Do not talk about this with anyone, not even your closest loved ones. Your safety is the most important thing." She left as quickly as she arrived, leaving me alone in Emily's room. I stood there feeling both disgust and relief. Disgust for the double face of that daughter-in-law I once loved. Relief because finally, after so much despair, we had something to hold on to, a weapon to fight with. I started to organize what we had messed up, trying to return everything to its original place. I put the drawer bottom back, aligned the books on the shelf. My hand passed over the expensive objects, the refined decorations, all bought with money ripped from the elderly. I felt nausea rise in my throat. After finishing, I went out to the front patio to breathe some fresh air, trying to shake off that fake smell of the room. The sunset light was soft, but not enough to warm the frozen soul I carried inside. Just at that moment, I saw Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor who has lived next to my house for over 20 years, watering some pots of bougainvillea in front of her porch. Upon seeing me, she immediately dropped the watering can. Her face showed concern. "Sarah." "My God, I finally find you." I heard. The neighbors do not stop talking. "What happened to the boy?" "To Daniel." "This morning I saw a police car in front of his house." Seeing her kind face full of goodness and that sincere concern in her wrinkled eyes, the wall of emotions I had tried to build came crashing down. Tears sprang from me, tears of helplessness and fear. I told her that Daniel had been arrested unjustly on absurd accusations. I only omitted the detail of Detective Bennett's secret investigation. Mrs. Higgins remained silent, listening attentively, while her thin hands gave soft pats on my back to console me. When I finished speaking, she remained thoughtful for a long while, staring into the void. Suddenly, she grabbed my hand, pulled me close, and lowered her voice as if she feared someone could hear us. "Sarah, listen to me. I have something to tell you. Maybe it will serve you." About 2 weeks ago, one night, I could not sleep things of age. I went out to the balcony to get some air. I saw Emily, your daughter-in-law, standing at the gate talking to a strange man. He was tall, and I remember very well he had a long scar on his cheek. My heart started pounding in my chest. The man with the scar from the photo. Mrs. Higgins continued recalling. They were speaking in low voices, but since it was early morning and everything was silent, I managed to hear some words. I saw Emily hand him a thick envelope and tell him, "The package for Frankfurt." He nodded and answered something that I do not know why stuck with me. "The widow of Leon is already clean." At the time it seemed strange to me, but then I forgot it. Now that you tell me this, I remembered. "The widow clean," I murmured. That was a key, without a doubt. The widow of Leon was perhaps a victim, and clean must be a code to say the scam was completed. I woke up suddenly. There it was, a witness, someone who could confirm that Emily had links to the fugitive criminal. That was the key piece to destroy the defense that Daniel acted alone. Mrs. Higgins. I squeezed her hand tight. My voice trembled with emotion. "Could you accompany me to the station? Your testimony is crucial. It can save Daniel." She did not hesitate for a second. She looked at me firmly. "Of course, dear. For Daniel. I love him like a grandson." I ran home to get the car keys. Mrs. Higgins sat in the passenger seat. We left that familiar street where we had lived in peace for so many years. I drove with one hand while with the other I tried to call Bennett to give her the good news, but she did not answer. Maybe she was busy in the lab. I decided to go straight to the station. When we took the main avenue, a white truck with no logo or sign appeared suddenly from a side street. It shot out like a wild beast, its lights aimed straight at my eyes. A blinding glare left me completely in the dark. I only managed to hear the tearing scream of Mrs. Higgins beside me and the awful sound of metal crashing. Then everything turned to darkness. A strong smell of disinfectant invaded my nose, penetrating and unpleasant. I tried to open my eyes. My head hurts as if they were splitting it with a hammer. The white light of the hospital hurts my eyes. I am lying in a bed with an IV in my arm. Bennett is standing next to me. Her face is tense like a rope. She no longer has that usual tranquility. Her normal clothes were replaced by her police uniform. "You are awake," she said with a grave voice. "You only suffered a mild concussion and some bruises. You will be fine." "Mrs. Higgins?" I asked. With a dry throat, every word hurt coming out. Bennett remained silent for a second that felt like a century. She avoided looking me in the eyes. "The woman who was with you did not survive. We are very sorry." The truck fled. "We are looking for it." My world collapsed again. I burst into tears. Hot tears ran down my cheeks, tears of fear of pain for losing such a good neighbor and of unbearable rage. Between sobs, I told Bennett what Mrs. Higgins had told me, about the man with the scar about the package and the widow of Leon. Bennett put a firm hand on my shoulder, giving me strength with that simple gesture. "Mrs. Miller, do you understand now? They do not just scam. They are willing to kill to silence those who know too much. This fight is no longer just for your son." At that moment, I knew she was right. The fear I felt turned into hate. I was not going to give up. I was going to fight. For Daniel and for Mrs. Higgins, the brave neighbor who paid too high a price for telling the truth. The next 2 days in the hospital felt like 2 years. The physical pain from the bruises and constant dizziness did not compare to the mental torment. Bennett visited often not only to update me on the investigation, but also to ensure my protection. There was always a plainclothes officer at the door of my room, watching day and night. His silent presence made me feel safe, but also reminded me that danger was very close. In moments alone, guilt drowned me. If I had not taken Mrs. Higgins in the car, if we had been more careful, if I had called a taxi instead of driving myself, thousands of what-ifs spun in my head. In one of her visits, seeing me sitting without reacting, Bennett put her hand on my shoulder and told me firmly, "Mrs. Miller, do not blame yourself anymore. They were already after her. Maybe they saw her talking to you. Maybe they were already watching the house. Sooner or later, they were going to act. The fault is not yours. The fault belongs to those bastards." Mrs. Higgins' funeral was held while I was still in the hospital. Her son, a middle-aged man living in another city, called me on the phone. He did not reproach me for anything. He only thanked me for being with his mother in her last moments. I asked Linda to order a large wreath of flowers. On the black ribbon, I wrote with my own hand for a brave neighbor, "Justice will be served." It was not just a promise for Mrs. Higgins, it was an oath to myself. The day I was discharged, it was Bennett herself who came to pick me up in her car. On the way home, as the car moved through the streets, I knew so well she gave me the first piece of good news. "We found the truck," she said, staring at the road. The driver rented it with fake documents, but he made a stupid mistake. He paid the rental with a credit card. Although that card was also fake, created with stolen information, the transaction left a digital trail my team could not ignore. Bennett explained that the cybercrime investigation team she leads had followed that trail to a seedy cyber cafe in a working-class area on the outskirts of the city. Thanks to the security cameras of the place, they managed to get a clear image of the suspect at the exact moment he was making the online transaction. And that face said Bennett, with a tone of satisfaction, impossible to hide matches perfectly with a profile in the Europol database. His real name is Jason Smith. He is a thug in the service of criminal organizations with a record for assault and extortion. And do you know what else? His most distinctive feature is a long scar on his right cheek. Only hours after confirming his identity, the police stormed a cheap hostel where Jason was hiding. He offered no resistance, as if he already knew that day was coming. Bennett took me back home, made sure everything was in order, and then returned to the station to participate directly in the interrogation. That same night, she called me to tell me what happened. At first, he was like a stone, Bennett recounted. He repeated the same phrase over and over. It was a traffic accident. I got scared and fled. He insisted he did not know who Emily was and had no relation to any criminal network. He played the role of a truck driver scared for having run over someone perfectly. They interrogated him for 24 hours straight. The most experienced investigators took turns interrogating him, using all kinds of tactics from the hardest to the softest. But they managed to get nothing out of him. Finally, I decided to try something different, Bennett said with a more serious tone. I no longer entered the room as a police inspector. I entered with some photos. She had printed in color the photos of the victims she found in Emily's notebook. Elderly, kindly people smiling with their grandchildren in family photos. She placed them on the metal table right in front of Jason. She began to speak with a calm voice, but with words as sharp as knives. This is Mrs. Schmidt, 82 years old, from Berlin. All her retirement money disappeared. She had to sell the house where she lived her whole life and move to a government nursing home. She pushed another photo. This is Mr. Dubois, 78 years old, from Lyon. He was a widower. After realizing he had given all his assets to scammers, he took his own life. Widower of Lyon. Whispered over the phone, Mrs. Higgins' words. Bennett continued. She placed on top a portrait photo of Mrs. Higgins. And this is Mrs. Higgins, 65 years old, a kind neighbor. You killed her just for overhearing a conversation she should not have heard. She had 3 grandchildren waiting for her at home. Finally, Bennett looked him straight in the eyes with an icy voice. If you cooperate and give up the mastermind, you will only face charges for vehicular manslaughter and can access a sentence reduction according to the law. If not, we will ensure you bear full responsibility for Mrs. Higgins' death with a charge of premeditated murder, plus a long list of crimes for complicity in fraud. You're going to die in prison, Jason. The stone began to crack. Jason lowered his head in silence for a long time. The ticking of the clock in the interrogation room became deafening. Finally, he looked up, and he began to speak. He confessed he had been hired by Emily. He was the man with the scar Mrs. Higgins had seen. At first, they only ordered him to scare her into silence, maybe breaking into her house or damaging her car. But seeing that we were driving hurriedly toward the station, he got scared and called Emily. The order was to act with more force. And then he revealed the most important information, an ace up the sleeve no one expected. Emily, she is very cautious, Jason said with a hoarse voice. She has something she calls insurance, an external hard drive. Everything is there. A complete list of victims' recordings of scam calls, money transfer schemes, and most importantly, recordings of internal meetings of the entire network, where the voices of the ringleaders are heard. She said if anything happened to her, that would be published automatically. Where is that hard drive? Bennett asked insistently. Jason shook his head. I do not know, but she was never separated from it. It was her life. If you find Emily, you will find that drive. Immediately, Bennett's technical team got to work. They analyzed the last calls Jason had made before being arrested. Most were irrelevant, but there were some unregistered numbers of the disposable type that communicated with him very often. Following the weak signal of one of those numbers, they managed to locate her last location, a secluded rural house upstate almost an hour from the city. A special heavily armed team was sent immediately. They did not storm in suddenly, but set up a silent siege, cutting off all escape routes. Bennett called me at dawn. "Mrs. Miller, we found her. Come." "You deserve to witness this. She sent a car for me." We did not go directly to the house, but stopped at a mobile command center. Actually, a large truck equipped with screens and cutting-edge technology parked a few blocks from the target, hidden behind some trees. The atmosphere inside was tense. The technicians were glued to the monitors. Only keystrokes and brief, precise conversations were heard. Sitting there, I could hear the accelerated beating of my heart. The nightmare of so many days was about to end. Bennett passed me some headphones. "We have intercepted the cell signal inside the house. Listen." With trembling hands, I put them on. After a few seconds of interference, a familiar and cutting voice was heard. It was Emily. "Yes, they arrested Jason." An idiot. He thought he was strong, but turned out to be soft. "But it does not matter." A male voice answered on the other side, scratchy, somewhat nervous. Emily let out a sarcastic laugh, which I could imagine perfectly without needing to see her. "Do not worry. Everything is in my husband's name, Daniel. He is a love-struck imbecile. A few fake tears are enough, and he believes everything. Now he is in prison for me carrying all the crimes. Let the police tear apart the whole country. They will not find me. The hard drive is still here, completely safe. It is our life. A love-struck imbecile." That phrase was like a stab straight to the heart. I clenched my fists tightly. My nails dug into my skin. Rage invaded me completely, consuming any trace of fear. That witch had not only destroyed my son's life, but had trampled on his love and trust in the cruelest way. Bennett looked at me sideways, noticing the fire in my eyes. Her gaze lit up. She said nothing. She just nodded silently to the tactical team leader next to her. Through the radio, I heard the order with a cold and determined voice. "All units act." On the main screen, the image from a drone floating over the house appeared clearly. I saw shadows dressed in tactical suits moving fast like ghosts, surrounding the house from all angles. They are the ghosts of justice. The front door was knocked down. Emily's desperate screams were heard. Some sounds of things breaking. Everything happened in less than a minute, fast and effective. The commander reported by radio with a voice showing no emotion. Target controlled. An external hard drive and several mobile phones were found. Zone secured. They brought Emily out with her hands handcuffed behind her back. She no longer had that expression of superiority. Her hair was messy. Her clothes a disaster. Passing in front of the command vehicle where we were, her gaze crossed by chance with the window. She saw me. For an instant, her eyes opened with surprise, but immediately filled with fierce hatred like a cornered snake. But she said nothing. The police put her in the car and took her away, disappearing into the darkness. Only hours later, with the irrefutable evidence from the hard drive and the recording of her confession, the release order for Daniel was signed immediately. I went to the detention center to get my son. When the heavy old metal door opened with a tearing screech, Daniel came out. A few days in prison had destroyed him. He looked thinner, gaunt, with a neglected beard and deep, dark circles. But his eyes no longer reflected despair. In its place, there was a painful void. He said not a word. He just walked quickly toward me and hugged me tightly. I felt his shoulders shake. I hugged him tight, caressing his back like when he was a child. On the way back, he finally spoke with a voice hoarse from not speaking for days. "I cannot believe it, Mom. The person I loved most, the mother of my son, could do something like this to me. How could I be so blind?" When we arrived at our usual house, Linda had already brought Michael. The boy was sitting on the sofa with a sad expression. But seeing Daniel enter, his eyes lit up. He screamed Daddy with a clear voice and ran like an arrow toward his father's open arms. Daniel knelt, hugged his little one tight, and buried his face in his soft head. Seeing that scene, I knew the worst nightmare of my life had ended, but I also knew my son had changed forever. The scar on his heart would never heal completely. He looked at me, and his eyes were now full of unbreakable determination. "It is all over. I am going to divorce her," he said firmly. "I am going to fight for custody of Michael. I will not allow my son to grow up with a mother like that." A few weeks later, on the day of the first trial, the sky was gray. Daniel, Bennett, and I were sitting in the first row reserved for witnesses and involved persons. Daniel wore a formal suit but still had a gaunt face. He sat upright with his gaze fixed ahead without wavering. The courtroom was spacious, solemn, with old oak benches and the golden national seal hanging high behind the judge. The atmosphere was charged with tension. Journalists filled the back seats, and their cameras looked like black cannons, aiming straight at the dock. The transnational fraud case, with implications of murder, had shaken the country, and Emily was the center of all attention. The side door opened. 2 agents escorted Emily inside. She wore a gray, baggy prisoner uniform, looking much thinner and paler. Her once shiny mane was now hastily gathered at the nape of her neck, leaving a faded forehead exposed. She walked with her eyes fixed on the ground, not daring to look at us even once. Jason Smith and the other accomplices of the network were also brought in later, seated on the accused bench next to her. The scar on Jason's cheek looked even more intimidating under the court light. I was called as the first witness. When I stood up, all eyes in the room fixed on me. I took a deep breath, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a firm and cutting voice, started asking me about daily life with Emily, about the suspicious signs that in my naivety I overlooked. I told everything from the secret calls at night, the overly expensive luxury items, to that fatal phrase about using Daniel's account so the money looked cleaner. When I recounted in detail how, together with Detective Bennett, we discovered the little black velvet bag in the secret drawer and the notebooks with the names of the elderly victims, the room went completely silent. I could feel the indignation spreading in the air. Emily's defense lawyer, a cunning guy, tried to insinuate that I had prejudices toward my daughter-in-law to diminish the value of my testimony. "Mrs. Miller?" he asked with an insinuating tone. "Is it not true that you never really accepted your daughter-in-law a young, successful, and independent woman, and that this testimony is nothing more than an exaggerated interpretation of a mother who wants to protect her son at all costs?" I looked him straight in the eyes. My voice no longer trembled. It was firm and sure. I loved Emily like a daughter. I felt proud of her. But my imagination could not have invented dozens of SIM cards from all over Europe. Nor could it have invented a list of elderly people who were scammed until they had nothing. And certainly my imagination could not have fabricated the photos where she appears next to internationally wanted criminals. Murmurs were heard in the room. The lawyer was left speechless and asked no more. In the following days, evidence from the hard drive was presented. They were devastating blows, impossible to deny. The recordings were played before the court. Emily's arrogant voice echoed throughout the room, betraying her and her accomplices. Everyone held their breath, listening to the coldly discussed plans to scam the disgusting laughter, while they boasted about the money they had stolen. Then it was Emily's turn. She stood up with her fragile figure. Everyone thought she would deny everything, that she would blame circumstances. But no. Instead, she decided to confess everything. Her voice was monotone, without emotion, as if she were reading a report on someone else's life. She recounted that 2 years ago, after failing in a cryptocurrency investment, she'd been left with a huge debt to loan sharks. They threatened to hurt not only her, but also Daniel and Michael. It was then, she said, looking at a lost point, when a partner approached me. They promised to pay the debt and give me a comfortable life on the condition that I participate in their project. At first, I thought I would only help in a few minor transactions. Then she recounted in more detail how they operated, how they hunted lonely elderly people on social networks and forums. We created fake sweepstakes websites, fictional customer service centers. When victims called, we asked for the bank OTP code to confirm the prize. As soon as we got it, the technical team emptied their accounts in seconds. When the prosecutor asked her the last question, "Why did you choose your own husband, Daniel Miller, as a scapegoat?" For the first time, Emily turned her head and looked toward us. Her gaze was empty, without an ounce of regret. "Because I needed a perfect replacement," she said with an icy voice. "Someone with a clean record without a criminal background. Someone living abroad to make tracking difficult. And most importantly, someone who fully trusted me, willing to sign anything I gave him." Daniel had all that. Daniel, sitting next to me, clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. I placed my hand gently on his in a gesture of comfort. After several days of trial, the court finally issued its verdict. The judge, with a serious face, read the sentence with a voice that echoed in the solemn room. Emily Miller was sentenced to 25 years in prison for multiple charges: leading a structured scam organization, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and complicity in the involuntary manslaughter of Mrs. Higgins. Jason Smith, for having collaborated with authorities, received a sentence of 10 years. The other accomplices of the network received penalties ranging from 5 to 15 years. Justice, although late, had been served. When the police took Emily away, she passed in front of our rows. Daniel stood up. Their gazes crossed for an instant. In her eyes was a terrifying void. In my son's, there was no longer love nor pain, only a cold and firm look. The door of the past closed forever. We left the court. The sun, after many cloudy days, appeared suddenly, forcing me to squint. The storm had truly passed. A few months after the trial, we sold the house. We could no longer live there. Every corner, every object was impregnated with memories, both of a false happiness and a real pain. Emily's office was like a scar in the house, and the living room reminded me of the day they arrested Daniel. That house had died for us. We moved to a small coastal town in Maine, a place where the pure air smells of salt and the constant sound of the waves can soothe any wound of the soul. We bought a little white house with sky blue window frames and, most importantly, a little garden full of bougainvillea and lavender. Daniel processed the divorce quickly. Emily, from jail, did not appeal nor ask for custody of the child. She had cut all ties with the world she left behind, sinking into the darkness she herself had created. My son obtained full custody of Michael. With the money from the sale of the house and part of my life savings, I decided to fulfill a dream I had been keeping for years, opening a small bakery. I called it Peace, because after all the storms, that was the only thing we yearned for. Every morning I wake up when it is still dark while the whole town is still asleep. The smell of flour butter, cinnamon, and melted chocolate fills my small kitchen. Measuring, kneading, shaping, and waiting for the breads has become therapy for my soul. I find calm in every repetitive movement. I find joy in creating sweets that give happiness to others. The Peace Bakery soon became the favorite place of the locals. From fishermen stopping for a warm croissant before heading out to sea, to children running after school for a chocolate cookie. Daniel also started a new life. He did not return to England. The wounds of the heart made him want to be close to his family more than ever. He got a job at a small interior design workshop in town. He did not make as much money as before, but that job gave my son something more valuable: time. Every afternoon at 4:30 sharp, he left the workshop to pick up Michael from school. Often I saw them walking together on the beach, hand in hand, building huge sandcastles, and then watching as the waves washed them away. At night after dinner, he taught Michael with patience, reading him stories of brave knights and kind princesses. He was fulfilling the role of father and mother in an admirable way with all his love and tenderness. Sometimes in quiet moments, Michael still asked for his mom. The innocent questions of a child broke my heart. "Grandma, where is my mommy? Why does she not come back to Daddy and me?" Daniel never lied to his son. He hugged him tight and answered with a warm and soft voice. "Mommy made a mistake, son, and now she is in a very far place trying to fix it. But never forget it. She loves you very much." One Sunday, while I was placing some fresh strawberry tarts on the shelf, a family car stopped in front of the bakery. Bennett got out of the vehicle. She was no longer wearing a police uniform, just a simple floral dress. She looked relaxed and happy. Captain Bennett! I smiled with joy and ran to hug her. After solving an important case, she had been promoted. She brought as a gift for Michael a beautiful model of a pirate ship. We sat in the small garden behind the bakery under a pergola covered in flowering vines, drinking coffee and eating croissants fresh from the oven. The press had called her a heroine, but when I mentioned it, Bennett just shook her head. "The true heroine is you, Mrs. Miller," she told me with a sincere look. "If it were not for your unwavering faith in your son, if it were not for your bravery in facing danger, maybe Daniel would still be in prison, and Emily would still be loose out there hurting more people." When Bennett was preparing to leave, Daniel and Michael were returning from the beach. Both had some grains of sand in their hair and skin tanned by the sun. Michael ran to show Bennett a shiny and beautiful shell he had just found. Seeing that scene, seeing the smile on my son's face, a smile that was no longer forced, I felt a deep warmth and gratitude fill my soul. That night, after closing the bakery, I stayed in the family kitchen, cleaning the last baking utensils. Through the window, I looked toward the garden. Daniel was pushing Michael's swing. The child's clear laughter mixed with the soft murmur of the sea in the distance and the lingering aroma of baked cakes. I once believed that living with righteousness, loving and trusting was enough to protect those one loves. But tragedy taught me a bitter lesson. Sometimes blind trust is the trap that can ruin our future. I chose to be silent before my suspicions. I preferred to keep the peace instead of seeking the truth, and the price was that my son almost lost his life for placing his faith in the wrong person. Now I understand that justice does not always arrive alone, and that the truth does not appear by itself. We must go out to look for it with courage without giving up, even if that means entering the darkness and facing the most ruthless. The story of revenge I just told you during this last hour was not to feed hatred, but to recover the justice that was trampled for my son, for the brave neighbor who fell, and for my own conscience. Never keep silent when your intuition tells you something is wrong, because sometimes acting in time can save a whole life. The names and places in this story have been modified to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are enduring silence inside their own homes? I honestly ask myself, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you keep quiet to not cause problems, or would you dare to face everything to recover your voice? I would love to know your opinion on this story of stories that hurt, or any suggestion to improve our content. May God always bless, and I have the certainty that courage will lead us to better days. On the final screen, I will leave you 2 of the most loved stories of the channel. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.